while the sentences you construct mean just what you intend them to mean. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master? That's all. Well, the fact is that words do mean many different things, and you are certainly not your reader's master. We all know what happened to Humpty Dumpty, and that can happen to you if you're not careful. Your brilliant and carefully thought out argument rather, will fall off the wall and shatter into pieces that can be reassembled only with difficulty, or not at all. Not all the king's horses and all the king's men, and not even an editor. Now, we do have to agree that Humpty Dumpty talked about words, and words are only the bricks. You have to assemble them into a building, sentences and paragraphs and larger units. And that is where the real difficulty lies. You of us, when we write, are architects working from detailed blueprints. Even if you have an outline of the article you're writing, so that sentence follows sentence logically, you still output each sentence piece by piece, word by word, clause by clause. In your mind, there are often links that you take for granted, but that do not make it onto the paper. Things like ghost commas, participles without anchor, stress, emphasis. These are all issues that we will meet in the course of the course. So, you know what you mean, and more or less take it for granted that readers will understand you. You know how you intend a word or sentence to be understood. It may never cross your mind that there's another possible meaning that might cause readers to stumble or misunderstand you. You know what syntax you intend, and may be quite oblivious to the fact that the sequence of clauses or tenses may be taken to say something quite different, or even just the opposite of what you have in mind. Precisely because you know what you mean, and you chose words and structures that were generated by your ideas, it's hard for you to review your work as if the text and thoughts are new, which is what they will be for your readers. One role of an editor is to provide not only a second set of eyes, that's proofreading, but also, even more so, a mind that is a blank slate and open to every possible meaning of your prose. But not all texts can be or are submitted to such an editor. And not all editors read that way for sure. So although you cannot fully escape the trap of knowing precisely what you mean, at least I hope you know what you mean, and never imagining that readers will misunderstand, there's a way to minimize the problem, which is what this is all about here, to learn and follow guidelines for precise writing and practice them until they're almost second nature. That's one of the things we'll be doing in this course. And the other thing, it is probably the bulk of the material, has to do with the rules of English grammar and syntax and precision in applying them, because all of us think today, all of us here think to some extent now in Hebrew. Even those of us who grew up thinking only in English. We live here, we speak Hebrew, so we need to review the rules of English grammar and syntax also. Now, the title of this series, Scope, Articulation, and Polysemy, or Polysemy, refers to 3 traps you need to avoid. Okay. Scope. How far does it go? Prepositions and verbs have objects. In English, where there are no declensions, we must usually rely on word order to identify the objects of the verb or the preposition. The problem occurs when the sequence of nouns, phrases, or clauses continues after the first identified object, the one that's obvious. The next phrase or noun or clause also governed by the preposition or the verb? Or does it have a different syntactic function in the sentence? Where does the series end? How do I get you people off my screen? Okay, so here. This is the examples that I use come either from material that I edited or translated or from published material, a lot of it from the New York Times. This is a book that's going to be published next year, I hope. The first is the obvious tension between the Lord's instructions to Elijah in verses 15 through 18 and the next three verses. Now, are the next three verses also instructions? Or is the contrast between verses 15 and 18 and verses 19 through 21? What is the scope of in? Just this or all of this? You see? The tension between the instructions and whatever is said in verses 19 through 21. This isn't clear until we get to the full stop and realize there's nothing more in the sentence. And that in retrospect, we know that the tension is between this and this. Okay. Now, again, it's important to understand the difference between Ben Sira and Ben La'ana and Hemiras. Are we talking about Ben Sira and Ben La'ana who are different from Hemiras? Or are we talking about Ben Sira who is different from Ben La'ana and Hemiras? The author knows that Ben Sira goes by himself and they go together, and Ben La'ana and Hemiras go together. But the readers may not, and there's no way for them to know the way this was expressed. Or both William and Mary and Anne. Now, does this refer to William and Mary, who were co-monarchs and husband and wife, and Anne by herself? Or does it refer to William and Mary and Anne, who were sisters? Once again, we can't, just from this part, we don't know. And here's a section title, The Philosophy of Halakha and Gender Studies. The way I read it made it sound as if the philosophy of halakha and the philosophy of gender studies. And I don't think that's what the author meant. And she should have written gender studies and the philosophy of halakha, which is not ambiguous. Here, the scope is clear. Okay. Now, scope and articulation, which is how words and phrases or clauses are connected, there's some overlap between them. But here, some examples where there's not. The difference between Anne's first birthday party and her first birthday party. The birthday party when there was one candle or maybe two on her cake, and the first one that she attended. Here, this little hyphen makes all the difference in the world and tells us which is meant. That was easy. It's an easy problem to fix. But clause order, the order of clauses in your sentences, is a much more difficult problem. Hotam focuses on dissuading religious women from enlisting in the IDF via PR and social media campaigns. Now, the order of the clauses makes this sound as if Hotam focuses on dissuading religious women from use of social media campaigns to enlist in the IDF. That's what it sounds like. Of course, what they meant is that it employs PR and social media campaigns to dissuade religious women from enlisting the IDF. This sentence is written is ambiguous and should be rewritten. Okay. Now, polysemy or polysemy means multiple meanings. Many English words, as in every language, I imagine, have more than one meaning. Plane, P-L-A-N-E, is a tree, a woodworking tool, a geometric surface, level, aircraft, and then there's P-L-A-I-N, which is a mishor, and not fancy. And the word bar has even more meanings. The more insidious problem is that the same word form may play multiple grammatical functions. It may be a noun or a verb or a participle or an adjective. By the end of the sentence, readers should be able to distinguish among them. But careful writers don't leave them confused until then. Now, here's an example of this. Roast your sugar faster and make it more delicious. The writer here tripped over the polysemy of make, which means both to cook and the cause to be. The meaning of the sentence is clear enough, but we trip over it briefly. We have to stop for a millisecond to figure out what was meant because of this. And this is even better. Working from home isn't working. Did the author mean avodah me'abayit inena avodah? Or perhaps avodah me'abayit lo ovedet? It's possible that both were meant, and since this was a headline, we can forgive the editor or the author. But it's an example of a problem that exists. We can go back and forth and not be sure. Okay, now this came from New York Times last week, and the original sentence was more like this. Within the hour, somebody caught it and rewrote it, so it wasn't so bad, but that's rare. So, both threats by Trump and his son's looming sentencing prompted Biden to break his promise. Now, does this mean both threats by Trump, or both is an adjective modifying threats? Two threats by Trump and his son's looming sentencing prompted Biden to break his promise. Or is it both threats by Trump and his son's sentencing prompted Biden to break his promise? Here, both is a conjunction paired with and. The sentence can mean either. The word both can be very dangerous, and some weeks from now, you will see a beautiful sentence where both is a reason for freezing. But okay, now, I hope that this course will make you more sensitive to these issues. There are many of them, but you have to be sensitive. And that's what we're trying to do. Many of you said you wanted to be in this course in order to write better, in order to catch your own mistakes. This is the point. If you're sensitive to these problems, you can catch them. Then if you don't avoid them in the first draft, in fact, no one does. I don't do it either. Some of the examples we will see are things that I did in my first drafts. We hope you will spot them on rereading, and you'll fix the problem. Okay. Does anybody want to interrupt with any comments or something before? Because we have now finished our introduction. What's coming next is Unit 0, which is sort of an overview of everything. It's called the Garden Path Sentence. Does anyone have any comments or anything they want to make? One thing I should say now, it has to be said at some point, which is that I find it very difficult to avoid using technical terminology of English grammar. I know that some of this is Chinese to people who are in this course. Some of it is so technical, it's even Chinese to Americans and British and other native speakers, even those educated in English-speaking universities. It is sort of hard to deal with technical issues without using technical terminology. What I will try to do is to stop and define them when I can. The printed version of this course often defines them in a footnote. And if you don't understand something, or you want to be in touch with me, email me all week long, and I will try to help and answer questions. That's what I'm here for. And if you really don't understand something, and it's you, raise your hand, talk to right on the chat on the chat, and I can go back and try to help you. Because this is just what we have to do in order to manage. Okay, so now we come to this first unit, which is called the Garden Path Sentence. This little quote here, I found when looking up things about the garden path sentence, and I couldn't avoid it because it combines the real garden and the written garden. Lancelot Brown, in the middle of the first half through the first two-thirds even of the 18th century, gardening was formal gardening was very important in England. It was also very important in France. In France, they had, well, we'll get to this in a second, they had very formal gardens. In England, they had gardens that they tried to make look like wild. And there were a number of famous people who, gardeners would think that they designed the gardens. And Lancelot Brown was one of them. He's known as Capability Brown. And this is a quotation attributed to him. I don't know where it comes for anything more about it, but here I put a comma. There, when it's necessary to cut the view, I put a parenthesis. There, I end it with a period and start on another theme. This links the two senses of garden paths so well that I thought I would share it with you. Okay. Now, a garden path sentence is grammatically correct in every respect. If read word by word, however, it's confusing because the grammatical, syntactical, or lexical function of the word just read is ambiguous and apt to be misconstrued. The Swiss Guard, the Vatican, the old man, the boat. As we first read it, guard, we think it's a noun. Man, we think it's a noun. They're not, they're verbs. Is it a past tense verb or a participle? The raft floated down the river, sank. Floated could be, this could be the sentence, the raft floated down the river. But no, it's not, sank. Is it the main clause or a dependent clause? The cotton clothing is made of, grows in Mississippi. We thought it's made of was going to be, it's going to be made of some species. But no, because is made of is a dependent clause. The main clause is grows in Mississippi. Does it modify the verb or its object? We painted the wall with cracks. Now, does that mean we painted cracks on the wall? Or we painted the wall that had cracks on it?
Excuse me, I didn't understand the question. The sentence was the cotton clothing. What am I missing?
Okay. You're right. It's the most difficult one here. I almost threw it out yesterday. The cotton clothing is made of organic materials. You expect that is made of is the only verb. You don't expect it to be saying that the cotton clothing grows in Mississippi. It is what it's really. The cotton, the cotton grows in Mississippi. I should have diagrammed this. The cotton grows in Mississippi.
It's the
not
cotton
the
that
cotton clothing.
clothing is
Not the
made.
not the
No?
cotton clothing. I should have done this. It should have been. We read it first as the cotton clothing, as if there were a hyphen here, is made of recycled fiber. But in fact, what it says is that the cotton that clothing is made of grows in Mississippi. It's the cotton grows in Mississippi, not clothing. I should have diagrammed
So
it.
in Hebrew you would say הכותנה שגדלה במיסיסיפי עשויה ממה שזה לא יהיה.
לא, הכותנה שממנה עשויים הבגדים גדלה במיסיסיפי. זה התרגום לי.
That's right. But in English, you don't have to do it. You see, this sentence is so problematic that I wasn't even explaining it correctly. Now I've got it. Next year, this may return in the actual unit on this. I'm not sure. Okay. And Helen is expecting next week to be wet. This is, Helen is expecting next week. Oh, yeah, she's expecting that next week will be wet. This is a beautiful garden path sentence. In all of these sentences, the first or most obvious attempt at parsing leads us towards the wrong meaning. Now, just as a brief excursus, a brief detour, there are several types of gardens and garden paths. In the formal French garden, you may head, everything is straight and formal and symmetrical. You may head for the exit, you reach a gate, and discover that it's not really the gate that you get out of. You have to keep going. There's another, the path goes past it. You haven't reached the exit. And there may be many such gates. In a sentence, this means a long string of clauses, and the meaning may not be ambiguous, but the distance is too far for people's brains to handle. We'll see sentences like that in a few weeks. There's also a garden of forking paths, like the Borges story. You reach a word and follow what you take to be its meaning, rather than another one that you may not even be aware of. Only later, perhaps not until the end of the sentence, sometimes not even then, you realize that you made a mistake, you backtrack, and reread correctly. That is, you read what the writer intended. But in some cases, readers do not realize that they have reached the wrong conclusion. The history lesson aside, the term actually derives from the English idiom to be led down the garden path, which means to be tricked or deceived or seduced, although it does come from the English garden of the 18th century, in which paths twist and turn and never lead straight to the destination. You don't know where you're going. It's going around. Okay. And that's okay. Now, you, as the author, you tread confidently down the path. You never go astray. You know what you wrote and where you're headed. All right, so you don't even know that there's a detour here. As our examples show, however, readers can be misdirected by the polysemy, the multiple meanings of any word that has context-dependent meanings, like expecting, or that functions as more than one part of speech, as a noun or a verb. We saw man and guard as a past tense formative participle, floated, or other transitive and intransitive verbs, noun and adjective, conjunction and preposition, and so on. All these. Now, a related type of ambiguity, though it might be more like a blind alley in a labyrinth, has to do with the scope of verbs, conjunctions, prepositions that we talked about before. Now, the first requirement is that you recognize the problem. Since you wrote it, you've got to pull back a bit and try to read it with other eyes. In most cases, there is a straightforward solution. You can insert a relative pronoun to convert the participle into a verb in a dependent clause. The raft that floated down the river sank. Or you can change the order of the clauses. Instead of Helen's expecting next week to be wet, Helen is expecting lots of rain next week. Or you can replace the problematic word, add another word, or change the syntax. Instead of the old man the boat, you can say the pensioners man the boat. Instead of the cotton clothing is made of grows in Mississippi, you can say the cotton for clothing grows in Mississippi. Or you can say, instead of saying the Swiss guard the Vatican, you can say the Swiss guard protects the Vatican. And here, we will note that this particular problem of verb and noun exists when you have a collective noun that takes a plural verb. The Swiss doesn't look like a plural, but it is, and therefore it takes a plural verb, but which looks like a singular noun. And here also the other things with the Swiss guard is we capitalize the G. That also immediately alerts readers that it's not a problem. Okay, now, but recognizing this is difficult. The two examples that we're going to have, these may be the last two tonight, were produced by writers with impeccable English. These are the concluding lines of Rex Warner's translation of Euripides' The Medea. What we thought is not confirmed, and what we thought not God contrives. And so it happens in this story. Now, what we thought is not confirmed. What we thought, not God contrives. That's how we read it. And we're perplexed. What does that mean? What we thought is not confirmed, and what we thought, not God contrives. Well, Warner was too free in his rendering, and this muddies the fact that the Greek syntax here is anti-parallel. He turned two participles in the Greek, which mean roughly thinkable and unthinkable, or thought of, not thought of, or even expected, unexpected, into active verbs with we as the subject. His subject, his syntax, trying to be rhythmic, is not idiomatic and thus not obvious. Because what he really meant was what we thought not. And that's what we didn't think. Now, there's another translation by E.P. Coleridge that says, what is expected does not come to Telos, and a God finds a way for the unexpected. Everybody will understand that, except for the fact that he used a technical Greek term that not everybody's going to know. The end, the achievement, the tachlit. Interesting enough, this same sentiment occurs at the end of several of Euripides' plays, but I didn't go to see whether Warner translated them and what he did. But I can hear somebody objecting or thinking that 40 minutes ago, I said that there's a difference between poetry and expository prose, and this is poetry, supposedly. But an ambiguity, we said, is a feature, a positive feature of poetry. Well, the answer is that ambiguity in poetry expands the meaning, provides another level of meaning, and not here interferes with understanding what is said. So if you were thinking that, there's your answer. Okay. This second example, which came from the New York Times somewhat more than a year ago. And when I say that the writer has impeccable English, because I think he and I had the same sixth grade teacher. I'm not sure, but I think she was still teaching when he got to the sixth grade. Anyway, the military offers an alternative to the academic meritocracy and values, determination, teamwork, and self-criticism. My first reading was that the military offers an alternative to the academic meritocracy and values. But that's not the end of the sentence. Determination, teamwork, and self-criticism. Something isn't right here. So I went back and started reading again. This time, I thought that it was the military often offers an alternative to the academic meritocracy, academic being the kind of meritocracy, and to value and values determination, the determination of values, and to teamwork, and to self-criticism. You know, that somehow meritocracy and determination were thought of by the writer as a unit, which is why he has only three parts, three legs to this comparison, to this alternative. But that didn't work either. I knew that couldn't be what Ethan meant. Then I finally realized on my third or fourth reading that values is a verb. The military offers an alternative to the academic meritocracy and values determination, teamwork, and self-criticism. The ambiguity of values didn't occur to the writer And many, perhaps even most readers, wouldn't have noticed it either. But I tripped over it, and I'm an expert reader. Now, several rewrites are possible. You can change the parallel verbs to subordination. Sorry, this is the first. You could add another alternative here so that we have a series. Academic, architecture, and social stratification. And because it's very unlikely to have a series A and B and C, we sort of understand that this second and isn't parallel to the first and if it isn't parallel to the first and, then maybe values is parallel offers. That's how once we work quickly. Now, the other way is, if you don't want to add additional information, is to change this to a subordinate clause. The military, which values determination, teamwork, and self-criticism, offers an alternative to the academic meritocracy. And here I'll ask for some feedback from people over the next month. Last year, I did very, very little diagramming of sentences. I wasn't sure how useful it is because a diagram is useful only if you already know how the sentence is put together. For this week, I did a fair amount of it, and the question is, how helpful is it? Okay, so this is in my way here, but the military offers, and you can see the nouns are in blue and the verbs are in red. Okay, so here's the original sentence. The military offers, an alternative is the object of offers, and I proposed that there were three objects of two: meritocracy and value determination, teamwork, and self-criticism. Or, and this is the actual sentence that was meant, the military offers an alternative to the military, and it values, once again, here you see that values we've recognized as a verb. Or the subordination that I showed, it offers an alternative to the meritocracy. The military, which values, offers an alternative. Or where I added another item, so that this and would not be parallel to this and. Once again, an alternative to and values. In the coming weeks, we will find ourselves on many more garden paths, and we'll learn additional ways to straighten them out, or at least to keep our readers from getting lost on them. You could also, I'm sorry, my notes, you could also simply have taken that sentence and put it into two sentences. And then, obviously, these are two parallel verbs. Now, we conclude with another of Alice's acquaintances. Alice, would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? The Cheshire Cat. That depends a good deal on where you want to get to. Alice, I don't much care where. The Cheshire Cat. Then it doesn't much matter which way you go. But unlike Miss Alice Little of Oxford, you do care where your readers get to in the end, or you wouldn't have been here this evening. Okay. I would like to now, since it's only 9:15, I want to address a few of the comments that I received when we published the fact that the course was going to take place. But I can come back and join you again. Okay, you see me again? But somebody said, there you are, as a matter of fact, I'm a native speaker, educated in an English-speaking country. I don't need a course about commas. To which my answer was, are you sure? Many of these examples come from the New York Times. We saw what Rex Warner could do in his translation. And I just looking at the Yale Alumni Magazine today, found one letter with two really bad mistakes. Somebody's got a good education, we assume, but you don't need a course about commas. But commas, although crucial, in fact, we're going to spend 2 weeks on commas. They're only one item. They're not the main thing. Somebody else said, I don't know if no, everybody's using AI now for editing. And that is something that's coming up. But AI is limited. Netta and I recently asked ChatGPT about I ate duck, I ate a duck, I ate the duck. It explained what each variation meant as opposed to the other ones, and then provided the rules, which of course he had scraped from the internet. But ChatGPT or Grammarly or any of these programs don't have any way to know which of these options is correct factually, what you are trying to say, or whether you think in Russian or French or Hebrew, languages which have no articles, or employ them differently. I really don't know how native Russian speakers manage in English, where the rules for using the articles are really very precise. But if you grew up without them, what do you do? But I know to ask a native Russian speaker writing in English whether she means composition, a composition, or the composition, musicologist. This is not something that the artificial intelligence knows because the way it's trained. Theoretically, you could write a program that would do this, but that's not the way it's trained. Now, AI can make your English technically correct. There's no question about that. But the result, the output, will not be smooth or elegant. And in fact, the sentence may not say what you meant, because it's probabilistic. It's what most people mean on the internet, on its sources. It's not maybe what you mean. Another problem, which doesn't exist yet, but will over the coming years, is feedback convergence or iterative learning. AI scrapes the internet for its input. As more and more articles that are available on the internet were edited by AI, the level is going to plummet. It's just all of the elegance, all of the interest, it levels it down. And yes, I know that I started out saying you don't want to interfere with your reader's direct apprehension. You want everything to be smooth. But if you should happen to find online, because it's there, the translator's introduction that I wrote to the first volume of Henri Atlan's 2-volume study, and you will see that I had a lot of fun there, making jokes without interfering with the flow, where the reader says, oh, yeah, that's funny. But and AI won't help you with that. And it's okay. So, okay, now, why are you here? Many of you said, almost all of you thought this, that I have to write in English, I have to publish because I want to get my degree, I want to get my fellowship, I want to get a job, I want to get tenure, I have to publish. Well, when you send an article out, first of all, it goes to an editor who then sends it to a referee, a reader. You want to get as close as possible to an acceptance the first time. if you've chosen the best journal. I know everybody starts with the highest level journal, expecting to go down to the next one. Okay, but anything that puts off first the editor, if the English isn't good enough, the editor is going to send it back immediately and say, have this edited. That's what keeps me in business. But then it'll go to the readers. And we know that the thing you're really supposed to avoid is not referring to an article that one of the referees wrote and is very proud. You have no idea that that's what happened. It's going to make him or her very upset with you. But if you write poor English, it's also going to make them have less a poorer evaluation of your article, or even going to keep them from seeing the brilliant points that you're making. And they will recommend not accepting it. You need to submit something that is at the highest level possible. Journals today do not employ editors. I spent 2 decades with one journal and perhaps a decade with another journal earlier, where the articles that were submitted, I rewrote so that they would read smoothly. This was necessary to some extent because a lot of the authors weren't native English speakers, but some were. But journals don't have the money for that anymore. They don't do that. What you write is what's going to be printed. And if you want your readers to appreciate what you wrote, you have to get it right. Money for editing, and that includes for my services, is scarce and hard to come by. The more you can do yourself, the better. But going back to AI, back in November, it hasn't been that long, a longtime client of mine decided he would try to make life easier. And also there was a deadline coming up. He was going to take